So I finished If Tempest and I had a lot of fun with it. It takes around 15 hours to finish, maybe an extra hour or two if you try to get every bad ending, and they're not really necessary. I tried a few, some were just dead ends and some were kind of cool, but it's something that you'd see in like the main path later on anyway. There's one at the final choice of the last guy, and that one was kind of cool, but still doesn't give me any extra info. There's a sad ending for each one that differ from the bad endings, but you can kind of skip them all as well, except maybe the Lucian one, because that one was kind of fine, and it's something I'll talk about in the spoilers maybe, where it kind of reminds me of like another title. Some of the tracks are straight up bangers. It reminds me of Code Vein, or Nier, or maybe in Muramasa, where it sets up the mood before you even start the game. And then you see the cover image, and you're just like left there wondering what the monster is meant to be. The art is kind of average, it has its own style, and it works. I enjoy it, but you can tell the different levels of polish some of these titles have when you compare them. So in terms of characters, there's the main girl, Anastasia, and then the 4 main guys. Technically, there's like 7 main characters, but only 4 routes. Anastasia doesn't have a voice actor, which is pretty sad considering some of the others in the list. Most of them don't really mean much unless you've read other otomes here and there. But the funny one is Lister, a character that's voiced by the same guy who did Shiro from Fate Night. Lister's the Inquisitor. He's hilarious in the way that his personality is just Archer being his usual snarky asshole. Yet there's that 1% of the time where it escalates enough to the point that it sounds like something Gilgamesh would say. Castle Rock is kind of the fuckboy one. He's one of the leaders of the Garuda Squadron. The Garuda are like legendary birds and they're like the kingdom's national animal. Lucian and Conrad are 2 of the 3 princes. They're both working on different projects and they have their all like political factions. There's a 3rd prince, but you can just ignore him, he's not important. Zen is the one with the brutish exterior. He's pretty fun. Some might prefer others, but overall he's fine. They all have their roles for the plot, but there's a lot of plot threads that are just left open to the point. It kind of became annoying because it felt like I just misunderstood a lot of it. The fan disc was released pretty recently, so maybe a good chunk of it gets answered over there, who knows, I don't. But outside of these plot threads, then I'll talk about in the spoilers, the plot itself is pretty straightforward. The easiest way to describe the title is that it's just Umineko without trolling, and it's really blunt about it. Instead of jumping through some hoops, it's more like the Princess Bride meme where Inigo Montoya says what they want, says what they did, and how they're connected alongside what's going to happen now. So you just have Anastasia trying her best, gets fucked over and gets killed, realizes that time was rewound, tries to fix it all, still dies and gets a monologue about the switch from this character that's rewinding her time. So she wants to go back way early so she can train enough to kill all these assholes that screwed her over. But now the witch is fucking with her too, and now she slaps the witch onto the kill list and just keeps on going. More plot points get introduced, more fuckery happens, and she goes along with it to just learn as much as she can before she inevitably dies. And this just repeats until the finale, which is great. Honestly, I wish I had more lines from the start, but it only starts shining like around halfway through. Overall, I'd give this around a low 8 in terms of my enjoyment, but in a more objective mindset, it's more like a 7 that's closer to a 6. Every section has their own plot points that you assume will be important by the finale, but a good chunk of them are just forgotten. There's this whole minigame where you're thrown into Witch's Court. It's rather easy, and there's at least 2 ways to beat them all, but from what I can tell, the culprit is always the same. So really all these choices could have been thrown out. I guess it's more important for Lister's route where a lot of the affection points comes from there, but overall, yeah, you can just ignore it, I guess. It's a fun title, you'll enjoy the banter, but the plot is kind of random at times where you can question if parts are rushed or not. So the spoilers is really more about nitpicks, but it does cover a lot of plot points in the title. So one of the parts that stuck with me was the monster you see from the title screen. You start the title and it's already there in the prologue, though it has no sprite from what I remember. It tries to keep Anastasia down and keeping her from hoping for any miracle that could save her from like her situation, right? Anastasia tells it to shut up and that she's tired of waiting, so she'll just do it herself, and the monster's like, holy shit, that's rad. Really at the time you just consider that it's like, oh, it's their darker thoughts. After the prologue, you never see it again outside of one scene in the finale of the Common Path. I guess I should explain that the routes are part of the Common Path, just that the last section for each route only gets unlocked after you finish the finale. So basically you get through 80% of one route and then they die or you die and it gets reset and some conditions are changed. Anyways, back to the main point, it turns out that the monster is herself with all her powers. She's basically trying to prevent any of it from happening. She basically just gave up, but it doesn't make sense. That version of her doesn't exist anymore unless she's going even further back for like 2 days that she was still in that room, but before she left for the night training. It's also stated that whilst the remaining witches can't confirm it, the theory that each timeline gets split into its own universe is really slim, considering it would have been recorded in this artifact thing. The monster also has his markings that Zen has. It's not a magic thing considering neither of the witches have them or even the goddess has them. And then they don't show Anastasia getting the markings that one time where she goes into Zen's world. Either the markings are actually part of Zen or you only get them if you isekai into Anastasia's world, which may make sense. Technically, she can have them in that one CG, and they just don't show them, it's under the clothes. And the only way that makes sense is if they saved it for the fan disc. Anyways, no idea why the monster has the markings. The easy or lazy monster for what the monster is just that it's the embodiment of the goddess powers and the hatred she felt before basically freezing her own time. She basically just needed some time alone to cool off, or she'd kill off all the humans. So there's a plot point where Anastasia is secluding herself in fear of nuking the kingdom. Really, the monster doesn't have its own CG in the game anyway, it just used it for the title screen. So at this point, I'm just hoping the fan disc addresses it again, otherwise it felt like, hey, it's something that I thought was really cool that they didn't like expand upon it. It's like, well, we already have this cool CG, we're just gonna slap it on. There's one with Castle Rock, but it's honestly nothing to be bothered about. The sect of the church killed off his sister, and that was one of the reveals in his section. It doesn't really get brought up again outside of Zen's route, where you can bring it up in the court minigames to save your ass, but it's seen as like an off-putting choice, so it could lead you to the sad ending. I think it's almost guaranteed. So it's not in the finale from what I remember, and it's probably something that would be brought up in the fan disc as well, but really you can just see it as foreshadowing that a lot of crap that you take for granted could have been working against you. By the end, it's one of those like, oh, humanity is full of beauty and grime type of trope. It's fine. I would say it was meant to be a lead for Lister's route, but either of them could be your first route, so that's just thrown to the trash. While I'm here, the Castle Rock group consists of 3 cadets, Hugo, Landon, and Mitchell. Mitchell is there in Lister's route, but the other 2 are mainly in just Castle Rock. A lot more so with Hugo, considering his dad is part of the church, but Landon is like the worst character in the VN from what I remember. He's a giga simp and doesn't know how to read the room. I dislike him more than the actual antagonists. At least they're entertaining or interesting. You can remove Landon, it would be just an overall improvement all around. Technically, there's this other entity called Endy, but that's kind of hit or miss. They could have done more with it, but he's kind of just forgotten until like the last 10 minutes. And it was basically a part that covers plot points. The point was that Endy was like something that could kill the witch, but it was ruled out considering it's a wild card and Anastasia would most likely die if she tried that type of plan anyway. He does come back for like 2 minutes in Zen's route, but then just gets forgotten again. Lister's the interesting one because it covers up the nobility slash like royalty aspect. Basically, there's the Neuschburn clan, and they're like part of the goddess lineage, and then there's the Ishii clan that was wiped out by the Neuschburns. They were the top guys when the goddess was around. Basically, the Ishii clan did all the shady shit behind the scenes to keep the kingdom running, while the public just assumed it was the goddess powers and they were keeping the kingdom prosperous. Anyways, Lister is like the sole survivor of them. The royalty had this festival where they believed on this like golden flower and it produced all these gems, and the myth was like only people with the goddess's blood can make it work. So the idea was that somebody might have replaced the king because the festival stopped happening like 15 years ago. Obviously they can't reproduce the gem crap anymore, and that's around the same time where Evelina, Anastasia's stepmom, left the castle and got married to her dad. So you assume she kinda knew and just she ran away before she get killed too. Basically by the finale you learned that the OG Neuschburns already stabbed the goddess and they got the body double for her. So the shit turning into gems couldn't be a thing for royalty to begin with, since the 0 of them were part of the goddess lineage. So the 3 ideas I can consider is that maybe you can do some chemistry shit to make it close enough that it worked for the flower crap, and the only reason you can even consider that is because that was kind of like the Ishii clan's thing. Like they have something to calm down people with magical power, so you can just slap anything there as a magic thing. It's like, hey, I mixed these things up, I have this freaking flower, and it's now extinct, so I can't do it anymore, so that's why it was cancelled. The 2 more prominent ones needs background info from the finale. Anastasia is basically the goddess's reincarnation, and the goddess made the Garuda, and they were considered like their perfect creation, solely because they can reproduce unlike the witches and helpers. So it's either that Anastasia's mom that had like close enough blood and she gave it to like her friend Evelina, so she gave it to the king, and so he can make the gems. So somehow the Garuda blood also works, but Castle Rock was really nosy enough to the point that the commander of the Garuda's squadron back then no longer had the opportunity to sell their blood off to the king anymore. To be fair, one of the Garudas did die, so it could have been that one specifically that had nothing to do with Castle Rock, who knows. Either way, all of the reveals kind of mess with Lister's route. In the end, you don't really know what the deal with Evelina is by the end. At least you can understand what's the deal with Conrad. He's a piece of shit, but so was the OG Northburn, so it's like, yeah, it makes sense. He'll do whatever he has to get ahead, so you understand his character. Evelina just has that VN super soldier syndrome crap where some of their senses are too subdued, so they do crazy shit to get some adrenaline going. So you can understand her abusing people, but why the child saver? It makes no sense. And that's basically it. From what I recall, Lucian's route was fine. It's like the finale, it works fine. Zen's route was also fine. I don't think there was any kind of like weird shit. It was mainly in like Lister's and Castle Rocks where it's like, why'd you bring this up? You know, Zen was all about the Isekai crap and how he transported from his world to there, and it's like, oh yeah, he just found an opening by accident. It's like, alright, makes sense, cool.